Good morning, everyone. My name is Randolph Williams, and I would like to welcome everyone to the December 2024 Lextran Board of Directors meeting. And to lead us in this meeting this morning is Lextran Board Chair, Mr. Hardendow.
Thank you, Randolph. We'll call the meeting to order, and we will call the roll. Ms. Rogers is absent. Judge Thurston is absent. Ms. Borges-Gonzalez is absent. Dr. Acapo is absent. Mr. Shininger. Here. Mr. Ward.
Present.
All right, we are lacking a quorum, so action items will have to be pushed to next meeting, as will approval of the November minutes. There is no chair's report, so we will jump straight into performance and financials. We're going for a new record.
Not ready. I do not even have Okay, good morning. For today's meeting, we're going to review the November performance report. So we'll start with our mission statement. We serve people in our community with mobility solutions. And some of the highlights for November include free rides on Election Day. We'll start over again. So highlights for November include free rides on Election Day so we could help the community get access to polls. We held our public engagement efforts for our December service improvements that included 3 public meetings on November 19th, and I do have a little bit more information for you at the end of the performance report on that. We had a chili cook-off in November, and one of our bus operators, Latasha Hart, was the winner. There was a lot of chili made, there was a lot of chili consumed, and some really nice fellowship of staff, and lots of opinions on what constitutes chili and what does not. We also provided free rides on Thanksgiving Day, and staff who were working were provided a meal. So jumping into ridership, you can see from this chart, the ridership is reporting on trend, but a little bit below the previous year. So we looked a little bit more into this, and I might toggle between these two, this one and this one. We're remaining on the curve, but it looks like in August is about the time that we started to see ridership trending a little bit lower than it has been. It's following the same sort of pattern that we see typically in following each month, the same pattern, but it is a little bit lower than normal. There's no specific sort of weekday, Saturday, Sunday that are standing out as a difference, same with the holiday ridership. However, we're keeping an eye on it, so we want to make sure that there's not some fatal flaw, there's not something that's happening, but that we can identify what's going on. And so looking back at information to figure out what's going on, what we can see in the future. And I think I talked about this a little bit last month, but there's also a question of, is this where we have hit sort of a normalization post-COVID, because we have seen ridership, since we've come out of COVID, seen ridership increase. So have we hit sort of like that crux, and we're normalizing to some extent?
When we look at the numbers, are there certain routes that are over or underperforming, or is it kind of an across the board, just fewer rides?
So
all over the city?
we haven't dug into like specifically there are routes that underperform regularly. We're not saying some giant gap in that, right? So the routes that typically perform highest are still typically performing highest. The routes typically performing lowest are still typically performing lowest. But we're trying to get more information as we move through the service improvement process. Ridership is a big factor that we're looking at, and we are in January. We will be jumping back into the next phase of that. So there's a lot of information for us to review as a group and dig in a little bit more and see what's really going on.
One other quick question before we move on, just about rides to the polls, because I had friends ask me about this. Were we providing rides to polling places, or it was just free so that people had improved access to the polls?
The latter.
Okay.
So the service was free so that people had improved access to polls. Many polling locations are sort of neighborhood and very like centralized specific. So
several years ago when they did polling at Kroger Field, we provided rides directly to Kroger Field. But because these are neighborhood specific, we are unfortunately not going to take a bus into your local church parking lot with 100 of your neighbors, that sort of thing. But just to sort of remove that barrier and not have to worry about if I don't have my payment on that day, I can still go exercise my civic right.
Did you see an increase in ridership that day?
That's an interesting question that I don't know, but I will get the answer.
Okay.
And I will say Thanksgiving is a little bit different because we offer Sunday service on that day. So it is typically a lower ridership day just because of the nature of the holiday. So we don't expect to see higher ridership on that day. I did want to touch just for a second, and I don't believe there's a chart in here, just on on-time performance. In your packet, you notice that it did remain below target of 90%. We have seen incremental improvements in December, and we're anticipating that the changes that we make this month will reflect in the January data. So it will not reflect on January's report, but in the January data because they're taking effect on December 22nd. So we have seen a little bit of improvement in on-time performance since November, but we expect significantly more when we hit January with the changes that we're planning on making. And as far as wheels on-time performance, I'm going to let Randolph touch on that. So moving on to safety, you'll notice that we had 4 preventable accidents in November. This is more continuing to normalize and get closer to where we normally land. In September and October, we were higher than normal. We have been addressing that and working to prevent preventable accidents. So we're seeing it normalize. We anticipate that we are getting back on track and that will continue to stay at a typical pace.
If we look back
Sorry, go
a
ahead.
few more years,
Mm-hmm.
was fiscal year 24 an outlier and we're sort of reverting to the mean? Like
So-
if we look at 23, 22, 21, is the 11 preventable accidents over the entire year an exceptionally low number?
It was not an exceptionally low number, and that's the year to date. So it does flux, right? But that 28 is an outlier.
Yeah.
So 25 has been a typically higher year than we would normally have. And it's looking at these, 1 month you will see we've had fewer workers' compensation claims to date in 25. So you can see how that impacts the numbers with the injury frequency rate. The days of lost time, that can fluctuate related to the type of injury that someone had. That may not necessarily be related to an accident. It's related to a workers' comp claim or something like that. So these numbers tell a story, but they do flux. And so if we had 5 accidents in December last year and we only have 2, those numbers are gonna flip a little bit again. Fiscal year 25 has been an outlier year for us. And happy to dig into some more information and do a more historical comparison for you if that would be helpful. But for being closer to the national standard is about 2, so 4 being closer to that, where we had that outlier with double digits, and then we came down to 7. Now we're down to 4, and so we're anticipating that we are making efforts to keep that a low number.
2 being a national average regardless of the size. Okay.
Yeah.
And every year we kind of evaluate that, the trends and using best practices. And coming up in January, we'll be doing a refresher training with
Thank you.
all operators, and we'll be looking at those trends compared to what can we resolve. Was it more mirror strikes, or was it more accidents with newer operators? Because we just started increasing the operator fleet. So.
Yep.
Yeah, and we are, part of that refresher on the agenda is an accident review. So looking back to see what accidents have happened with staff. So not just sort of saying, you guys did more mirror taps. Here's what happened. How do all of these things that we're covering reflect back to this and work to make a safer work environment for everyone. So for maintenance, this number is back up to what you all are used to seeing as well. Just over 15,000 miles between road calls, and they completed 61 of 61, continuing at 100% on maintenance inspections. Do you all have any additional questions before I talk quickly about service
I have
improvements?
a question
course.
about operating expenses per mile and per hour. It went up about 18%.
Mhm.
I wonder if you guys had any reason why?
Yes, I'll talk about that.
Okay, during the
Yeah.
budget, great.
Yeah, Nikki's going to talk about that. We
All
knew
right.
you were going to ask, so we were prepared for
All
that.
right, thank you.
But by the same token, I noticed that our fare box recovery is lagging a bit. Are we just seeing more riders who are subsidized riders?
So there's a lot of those things. It could be more riders who are subsidized, that sort of thing, yes. So if you are presenting and you don't pay a fare for whatever reason,
Yeah.
yeah.
On the new hires,
Mhm.
so there's 12 on this. How many are still with us?
I think they're all with us, but one.
That's
We
better
had
than
one,
normal,
yeah,
right?
we had one leave, last week.
Is that an operator?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it an operator that got trained and then got a CDL job somewhere else?
No, it was an operator who did not make it through training.
Okay,
She decided this was not the job for her.
got it.
Thank you.
Okay, so for our December service improvements, we held a public comment period for about 2 weeks, 2 weeks in November with 3 public meetings, and we took that structure a little differently. We had one meeting where we invited people to come to us, one meeting where we went out to one of the busiest stops in the system and met with people there, and then one meeting where we went to the neighborhood association and asked them to collaborate with us on this information. So typically we've asked people to come to us, and well, we didn't do that this time. We ended up receiving 42 unique pieces of feedback on these service improvements, which getting 42 people to come to you is a big task. Getting 42 people to actively engage with your information and send you something back is a great success, right? So not all of them were from those meetings that we had. We received them via voicemail, social media, emails, comment cards. We had operators actively engaging with, who drive these routes, actively engaging with customers. And so we received some comments from internal engagement as well. Those were documented a little bit differently. But overall, great information that we received from people. About 2/3 of these comments were regarding the changes with Route 4. So because of that, because of what we heard from businesses, we heard from individuals, people who were unimpacted by that potential change were like, yeah, cool, I don't have any concerns. But we heard a lot from people, community members who maybe work with people with disabilities or work with active recovery, job placement, those sorts of things. We heard that those generators at Stanton Way are very important to them. So based on that, we had proposed, if you see on Newtown Pike Route 4 there, that dotted line that goes up to Stanton Way, we had proposed to remove that section completely. Based on what we heard, that was not a reasonable option for jobs, especially jobs, really, that's what it comes down to. The folks working at those generators at the end of the line. We did not hear a lot from the sections in between on Newtown itself. But when we talked to them, we also heard, yes, we understand that there's a lateness issue with this bus and that the reliability is important, and I do need my employees here on time, but I need them here more. So we have looked at the ridership, the timing, the on-time performance, lots of different factors, the individual stops, all of it, and we applied 6 trips, 2 in the morning, 2 midday, and 2 mid-evening, early evening, depending on how you view that, between 7 and 8 p.m., that will service the area. And what we plan on doing is continuing to monitor the ridership, the on-time performance, and all of those things to make sure that this is the right move and that we are continuing to serve the population, reaching back out to folks who work there to see that it meets their needs. What we heard from one of the businesses is, I don't really care what time you get them there, I will figure that out. Just get them there. You can get them to me and you can get them home. That's what I need you to do. I'll figure out the schedules. Like, I got this. So in an attempt to be responsive, we applied those sort of incremental to offer folks the ability to continue to go to Stanton Way.
Are you trying to avoid the peak of rush hour?
We are.
Okay, so what are the times? in the
So the
morning?
times are 6:35 and 7:35 a.m., knowing that that 7:35 could be a little bit hairy. 12:15 and 12:50, 50, and then 7:25 and 8:35 p.m. So avoiding the peak of rush.
And that timestamp is when the bus arrives at the end of the line, if you will.
Those timestamps, I apologize, are when they depart the transit center.
Okay.
So those are the departing times from the transit center. So that departing time will dictate all of the following times. And the other thing that we looked at is trying to make sure that if we have two buses out running service, that they're not necessarily the same vehicle running back to back. So if I'm going out to Stanton Way and I get stuck in traffic, I have somebody behind me who is still running, hopefully on time, and then I can catch up in my next trip, and we're not getting both buses stuck in the traffic, if that makes sense.
That's why they're separated by as much time.
Yeah, so they're on opposite trips.
Meaning one's going outbound while the other is inbound.
Exactly, yes. We did remove the section of Masterson Station Drive as proposed. We did hear from a few people, and we have been evaluating what that would look like, talking to people, making sure that they understand what's going on. Significantly less engagement as far as that's concerned. Route 3, Tate's Creek, I did not think you guys wanted to look at 100 different times. So I did not place a schedule on there. That timing is being adjusted and added throughout the route. And so we are going to be at the transit center this afternoon, tomorrow afternoon, Friday afternoon, handing out schedules on the physical vehicles as people are boarding and getting off. We've already been putting the information out into the community, and then we currently have schedules available on our website and at the transit center, and then the avail, so internally and on the app will update on the 22nd itself. Those times will not update before they're implemented. I think
Is the Route 4 problem, I don't want to call it that, but when we get around to doing our microtransit study in the new year, is this the kind of use case where this would be something we might study for that?
Yes. And so that would be the kind of, when we're evaluating peer cities, if they have a similar structure, we want to see that kind of information. How is it successful? Why is it successful? But yes, that would be a potential use case. So perhaps that section of Newtown Pike is a microtransit zone. And someone would be able to access the fixed route up to Citation Boulevard, which is where that solid line goes across, and then interact with microtransit out to Stanton Way. That's a potential use case, absolutely, yeah.
It's still gonna take the same amount of time.
What's that?
I said it's still gonna take the same amount of time.
It is.
Sure. I was just thinking if it helps the fixed route to stay on time by not sending it all the way out, and then we have a sort of subsidiary loop that's less time sensitive, I guess.
And so in theory, you could, and I am literally just making this up as I go, so this is not something that we're specifically looking at, I want to be clear.
Sure.
It could be Newtown Pike over to Georgetown Road, or even as far as Greendale or Leestown between Citation and the highway. That could be a potential zone. So we don't currently have excellent service in every single area. That area is growing widely, so that could be a potential zone, and it would capture all of those, and there would be different hubs where someone could access a microtransit ride either to or from to connect with the main line of service. So it wouldn't remove the main line of service per se, but it would add additional coverage and additional opportunities in those areas. But yes, that's absolutely a use case.
The ridership on that dotted line is still pretty low though, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
low single digits.
Not always single digits, but yeah. Stanton Way was the busiest
Was
stop.
what?
At Stanton Way, the E up there, which is where they have asked us to continue, was the absolute busiest stop in the area, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you all. Is Alan going to control for you?
All right, so before I get into before I jump into the paratransit report, I'd like to take this time to introduce Mr. Steve Shear. Can you stay up for a second? He is the Senior VP of Operations for RITP Dev. So thank you for coming. Right. All right, so for the month of November, the paratransit ridership numbers came in at 13,853. This was a slight decrease from the previous month. However, we did notice in the trend that the overall fiscal year 25 ridership numbers remain higher than the previous year to date. As far as the system productivity, the weekday ridership came in at 11,361. That also showed an increase in fiscal year 25 compared to 24. Since this was a month with two holidays, Thanksgiving and the day after Thanksgiving, we've seen some ridership fluctuate from out of the weekday to the holiday ridership numbers, which was 191. The total ridership miles and hours continue to increase in fiscal year 25 compared to 24. The trips per mile is right on point, same exact number, 0.16, as it was in fiscal year 24. And the trips per hour came in at 1.89, which was slightly a decrease from the previous month, and is still a slight decrease from fiscal year 24. For the month of November, RTP Dev had 0 preventable accidents in a 30-day period, compared to one preventable accident from last month. What we also noticed in this trend was fiscal year 25 continues to exceed 2024, 5 accidents for fiscal year 25 versus the 9 from previous year. As far as the OTP performance, I'll start from the paratransit OTP performance chart on my left, your right, my right, your left side. On the chart, you'll notice that it's 3 lines. The first line being the average OTP fiscal year 20 through 24. You'll also see the green line, which is the monthly OTP, which is the on-time performance that is reported to the board and you all. And then you'll also see, last but not least, the gray dotted line, which is the audited OTP performance for RITP Dev Wheels service. The difference between the monthly and the audited OTP is that the monthly OTP comes directly from the EcoLane software system, and it represents the completed trips divided by the total amount of on-time trips. The audited information, what we do with that is it reports the same information, but the one thing that the monthly OTP doesn't have that the audited information does have is anything that's adjusted in between. So those things could be from a system error or a trip that has been changed from that was requested to be picked up early or something like that. The system won't take into account for those type of adjustments and reconciles. So we usually walk through an auditing process to kind of catch those type of things. We've been talking about concerns with the validity of the data that comes from EcoLane software for quite some time now. So the auditing process is an ongoing process for the OTP. Historically, the unaudited information continue to be consistently reviewed, and we try to work on ways to resolve any concerns or issues that arise during the time that we find. Lextran, as a whole, Lextran, we feel that we are confident in the reporting that is starting to improve, and that it's starting to show a better correlation with the monthly OTP versus the audited information the closer towards the end of the trend. So before you click on the next slide, what you'll notice is that between December and about maybe March, the monthly OTP and the audited information is fairly in line with each other. And then it starts to expand in between April, May, and June, and then kind of contracts back. When it touches the line, we're fairly similar, maybe off by about 4% of an adjustment. And then you also see it contract again. So those contractions would be gaps that we notice in the system, which we can show you on the timeline slide. This is the paratransit on-time performance timeline of starting from the moment of identifying a major gap in the raw data that we pulled when we compared it to the EcoLane software OTP, monthly OTP, leading up to where we are in the process now. So starting in the month of March, we noticed some huge gaps in what was reported from EcoLane as far as what was actually a completed trip. So a completed trip is actually when an operator arrives to a location and they actually pick a person up and they drop them off to the destination, whether it be for the pickup time or for an appointment time, a requested pickup time or appointment time. We've also noticed in that month of March that it started to show a huge increase in system errors, meaning that the system may have been down and it may not have been reporting the information properly, and or it may have been some administration concerns as far as data entry. So what we did was in the month of April, we started to have internal meetings and meetings collectively with RTB Dev to discuss what we've seen and find a way to address the anomalies. So out of that came a narrative report, which was about a group of about 3 different reports. And the purpose of having those reports was for us to separate what the system was actually identifying as a completed trip and how did it transition that completed trip into whether it was on time, early, or late. In doing that, we kind of understood what the system concerns were versus what was a formula concern and what was administrative concern. In doing that in the timeline and developing that process, that narrative process, it also gave us an opportunity to discuss a process for reconciling anything that we saw. Leading up to that expansion of a gap of time, which would have been that May to July time, we began reconciling information. And based off the information that we saw in the April and May report from the narrative report that we created, we streamlined a more robust narrative report. That 3-report system grew into about 13 reports of breaking down every single trip and understanding where should this trip go and why is the system or a person for that matter directing this trip to do something differently. We needed to define the on-time performance as a completed trip equals on-time trips divided by completed trips. And the system just wasn't giving us that information. In breaking down individual trips, we found that it was a lot more than we anticipated. So what we did was we connected with RTB Dev to work with EcoLane. We had a number of phone calls to discuss the data itself and come up with a transition plan on how to best resolve it. In the meantime, that process kind of blossomed into redefining the process of the reconciliation process. So right now we trail check every change and we also direct it back into the right category. So we break it all apart and we put it back together at the end of the month. And as we got closer to breaking down that trip, detailed information, and then also working with EcoLane as it updated it made frequent updates in the process in the software system, the numbers started getting closer back to monthly versus the audited information, which gave us the warm and fuzzies again. And now you're leading into the month of September where RTB Dev signed for a new contract. But this time it contracted again because the OTP was then viewed in a different way. So before the old contract was the OTP was based off of pickups, and now with the new contract we wanted to define and make sure that we captured the true on-time performance for every single customer, and that accounted for pickups and drop-offs, appointment drop-offs. So once again we had to look at that data and we immediately were able to identify a red flag instantly because we already had the information separated into trip by trip. We were able to meet with our TB Dev, some of the corporate folks as well, to discuss that concern, the contractual language as far as the OTP, and out came the end of the timeline, which is November. We are currently in another phase of EcoLane having an updated software, and it should reflect some new changes that we once again feel confident that with those changes, OTP, the monthly OTP and the audited information should be right back on track again. We haven't been able to account that this update is working effectively the way it should, but we won't be able to see any changes, the full changes until January 2025 with that report. Next slide. So with the on-time performance, data inconsistencies are still happening with the reports pulled from EcoLane. But once again, we've created a robust narrative report to kind of combat and make adjustments as we go along and identify any red flags immediately so we can address them. And we're continuously working with our TB Dev corporate team to better communicate those changes and concerns to make sure that the trips are counted on time and to improve on-time performance. Last but not least, in the month of November, we did do that update, hopefully resolving any issues, and that should be seen in the month of January, and we anticipate that that information will converge in the upcoming months.
So did EcoLane make updates across their whole enterprise or just for us?
Both. So, and please correct me if I'm not saying it right, but both. So EcoLane does several updates, maybe on a monthly scale, nationwide, but also based off of our concerns when we have monthly meetings. They also make adjustments along the way as well. But they'll also let us know that they won't be able to enroll those new changes until the update happens.
Yeah. So we're saying the on-time performance audited is better than what had been reported.
In times, sometimes you will see that the monthly OTP may be better than the audited information and vice versa, and that all depends on how the information is subtracted from the system. And that's the whole point of the auditing process, so we can just tone it back in. So if the system looks at, and just for an example, if the system is pulling 15 minutes and 15-minute sets and we're looking at 30 and 30, it doesn't really help us. And we have to find that correlation of in between. If the system is recognizing a customer is an early trip and it goes against the on-time performance, and we find out during the reconciliation process that a customer actually wants to go early, we want to make sure that we account for that towards the on-time performance. Any other questions?
What's the most meaningful to the rider? Is it getting picked up on time or getting there on time?
I've listened to some of the calls and I've had an opportunity to speak to some of the folks. I think the communication piece. I understand that the system may be slow at times when it's raining or accidents or on Newtown Pike, clearly, with construction. I just need to know. I need to be able to have an option to make that arrangement in that call, whether to cancel or to make other arrangements. And that communication will go a long way.
Okay.
Most customers are happy to get out their home early or get picked up from a grocery store early to make it home to tend to other things and spend time with family, or just know that they're going to be picked up late so they can make other arrangements as well.
Thank you, Randolph.
Thank you.
Morning.
Hello?
We are moving on to the financials. We'll take a look at the balance sheet for November. We're 5 months into the fiscal year. Operating cash is looking good at this point. We had our big property tax, the largest payment that we received of the year, come in November. So we're pleased with that. And I'll go into more of the expenses unless you have questions on the balance sheet. Okay. We will talk about the cost per hour and cost per mile that you had a question about earlier. The month of November, we did the retro pay for the employees. The union contract was signed at the end of November, so we did the retro pay in November. That caused the expenses for November to look unusually large, but we did retro pay back to July 1st. So you will see on the wages, we are over budget at this time for the 5 months of the year. We, as you know, the union contract came in a little bit over what we budgeted, so we expected the wages to be a little bit more, but also we had to pay retro on overtime also. The cost per mile and the cost per hour, just in case you're curious, the cost per hour is based on all operations costs, such as wages and fringe, all salaries, and everything except maintenance. Cost per mile is for all maintenance costs and fuel. So when you see those costs up, so most of the time you're going to see the cost per hour go up, but it's minimal on the cost per mile unless the fuel goes up. So we did do the retro pay for maintenance employees also, but there aren't as many of them, so it didn't look as huge for the month of November. So our property taxes, as you see, we are right at $19 million. This time last year we had about $18 million, and most of that's due to timing when people pay their taxes, but we are a little bit over budget, so that is always a good thing. Passenger revenue is still looking good. We're a little bit over budget on that also. Our other revenue has caught up a little bit. That is 4 months of UK payments. So we have also received in the month of December, we received the November payment too, so we're up to date with the UK, so you'll see that other revenue has caught up. Our fringe benefits are still under budget, thank goodness, because that will offset the wages that we are over. Professional services are looking really good at this time. We'll see more expenses in that for the spring when we do some of the stuff on the facilities, such as the window cleaning. We've done carpet cleaning recently. We'll do that again in the spring after the snow. Some of the facility related stuff, as well as doing some of the engine replacements that we have budgeted for. Materials and supplies is looking really good at this time. It is 60,000 over, but that's actually really good for this time of year. Most of that is for maintenance for bus parts, and there are a few things that we've done for facility related that's caused that to be over, but that's not a concern at this time. Our diesel fuel is running monthly average for November was $237. The year-to-date average is $240. We are about $100,000 less, $120,000 less in expenses for diesel than we were this time last year. Our CNG is still running at $1.08 diesel gallon equivalent, so we're very happy with that. Everything else is really looking good. Our dues and subscriptions over budget, that's due to timing, but we're very pleased at this time with the way the budget's looking. But I will be glad to answer any questions.
On the overtime, is that going to be impacted in a positive way with the new operators?
We, knock on wood right now, if all the ones that we have in training come out of training, we will be fully staffed on the operations side, which will cut down on some of the overtime. It won't cut down on all of it, obviously, because we have some people on long-term leave or vacations and sick time and things, but we are hoping to see a decline in that. So first time in 8 to 10 years that we've actually done it fully staffed, so I don't want to jinx it.
What's the starting rate now for an operator?
Shoot, I can't remember. We were at 25.85 and 7% on top of whatever 25.85 is. I can't remember off the top of my head, but we have seen some really good applicants lately.
What's the difference?
So, any more questions?
Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you.
I have one more question.
Oh, sorry.
On operators, do previously employed operators ever come back?
Yes. We have a lot of people come back.
Pretty
We have,
cool.
it's very common for operators and it's common for maintenance also.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, thank you.
All right, as noted, no quorum today, so we will move past the action items. I did not see a change order report, is that correct?
No change.
No change order report. Any old business or new business? No. You want to walk us through proposed agenda items for the coming months?
All right, so for the upcoming months, we do have on the agenda to discuss the progress report for RATP Dev. We have the PTAS, which is the Public Transit Agency Safety Plan. We have the Agricultural Engineering and Planning Services, as well as the CNG enhancements. And with the CNG enhancements, Chris probably could explain it better than I can, but it is to increase the safety while the CNG vehicles are being worked on. And the enhancements would include methane detections and adding a ventilation system to kind of make sure that the air can kind of escape the room up the walls, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And the Architectural Engineering and Planning Services, is that an RFP that is currently out, or has that already concluded?
It's already complete.
Thanks. All right. No need for closed session, so we will adjourn. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.